So I'm interested myself to get into this issue that Tom raised at the beginning about what does this mean for compliance and ethics? Because I think it's. Could I talk about that a bit? Because I think it was a really. Or Tom, do you want to say more about your question before I?
No, I'd absolutely love to, and I want to frame it with there are multiple components to a compliance program overlaid with ethics, and Earnie and I have both been doing this for many years, and it's things like policies and procedures, risk management strategies, training on policies and procedures and risk management, monitoring, continuous improvement or continuous upgrades, and certainly leadership, tone at the top. And then within the levels of an organization, every level has a different role. The board of directors has a role, senior management has a role, a chief compliance officer has a role, middle managers have roles, and as we say, the tone at the bottom has a role. So I want to overlay that on whatever remarks you're about to go, and then Earnie and I will explore those.
Yeah. I think it's a both and again, but to respond by way of a couple of stories. One of my colleagues who works in health, she's an academic who looks at health. We were having a conversation with me and a few other people, and it was after a recent case in the UK where a nurse seemingly has been. Sorry, the doorbell's now gone, but I'm going to ignore the doorbell. So I've got bells going off everywhere. What she was saying was this nurse has been murdering babies, so it seems. I'm not getting into the rights and wrongs of it. And she said all that's going to happen is they'll tighten up the procedures. They'll write more manuals. They'll measure more things. They'll ask more questions, and it won't get any better. And 10 years' time, we'll be back here again. We've been here before. We'll be back here again. And the response is always to tighten up the machine. And we got into, and I talked to a couple of rheumatology friend of mine and various other medics about this as well. And what she was saying is what we need is a culture that, first of all, people used to work in teams much more. There's more of an efficiency model in hospitals now where you're never working with the same people. You're always in this team and then in that team, and these people come together for this shift. Whereas in the past, there used to be much more continuity. You joined a team, and there was trust built up, you learnt, and you felt responsible. And my rheumatology friend said I would go up to see a patient, and the doctors and the nurses around it, they would know everything about this patient. They'd have been working with them. They felt responsible for bringing me in as the specialist in this situation. And that trust and relationship and teamwork has been fractured. And that a lot of getting better behaviours to people is building trust, building teamwork, so that there is an oversight. If somebody's behaving oddly in your team, you're going to notice it because you've got to know people. And that if you do raise the alarm, it's not overlaid with views of, is this just misogyny and these kind of things, will it be taken seriously? So her feeling was we need to go back to what she called a natural sort of governance, where we spend more time trusting that if we do that in that kind of softer way, as well as having principles and procedures, it's not throwing that away, but it's not cranking up that even more. And another example in the same vein was in another hospital, another story. There'd been a lot of falls. Elderly people and other people were falling a lot. What they decided to do in this particular hospital was to put a nurse coach in, to actually have a nurse whose job was to coach other nurses. So she'd be saying things like, if that was your mum, would you leave her on the toilet while you went and had a coffee? How would you like it if that was your mum? When getting people to be more reflective, to coach them and get them to think through more. What tends to cause falls? Have you had a fall recently? What could you have done differently that might have stopped that happening? And the number of falls went down in this hospital quite dramatically with her role. But then the powers that be decided that what really was needed is they had to collect metrics. So they had to go back to being able to prove that things had got better. So she spent less and less time coaching and more time filling in forms to measure how many falls there'd been. And in the end, they gave up on her doing the coaching. Didn't fit the model it was coming from on high. And there was so much paperwork to do. And surprise, surprise, the number of falls went up again. So there is a kind of mindset that we think the answer should be. It sometimes feels like it doesn't matter what the answer is, but can we measure it? And then I can give you some figures and it shows I'm being compliant or not compliant. Whereas if we tackle the root cause of it and said, how do we actually behave in a way that effectively reduces the issue? It doesn't stop you reporting on it, but it changes the focus. And I think that's very compelling for me in terms of how we go. And I think we see it in education, that when we were all at school, I suspect, there wasn't much paperwork. There was a school secretary and a bursar, and the school secretary was the one you went to for a plaster for your knee. And the teachers taught. And now there's a whole kind of machine of people. There's teaching assistants, and my niece, who's a head teacher, spends 90% of her time filling in forms and being compliant. And teachers are asked they have to teach in a particular way. They have to show they've taught in a particular way. We constantly think that compliance is about measures as opposed to behaviors and how we engender that.
Yeah, I think that's really brilliant, because what we're getting into is, for ethics and compliance professionals, what does leaning into a complexity worldview look like in terms of their roles and responsibilities?
Yeah.
And something that you mentioned that we promote in ethics and compliance is root cause analysis.
Yes.
If you don't understand the root causes of the situation that you're trying to deal with, then how can you come up with intervention strategies that remedy the situation rather than creating more problems? I'd like to give you some other words or phrases that I think typify a complexity worldview for professionals. And one of the things I'd like to say is that I was so impressed in your book that you spend a lot of time talking about values, ethics, intention. Yeah. It's just a natural part of your narrative. Yeah. But I think that for ethics and compliance professionals, what I would suggest for people is to lean into developing collaboration skills, because you've got to be able to ask questions in order to understand the needs of your negotiating partners in the organization. Doing stakeholder analysis, which allows you to shift in terms of your perspective, to get out of your hierarchical bands of talking to the same people, going and having lunch with frontline employees in the employee cafeteria rather than just hanging out in the executive dining room.
Yes. They used to call it management by walking about.
Yeah.
Do you remember that phrase? Yeah.
Exactly. And things like getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, looking and monitoring for the weak signals of change, the emerging shoots, as you talk about. What resonates with you from those things that I mentioned in terms of what a complexity worldview looks like in terms of behavior and practice?
Yes. Yeah. I think definitely embracing diversity, developing collaboration skills, which include, and this is the paradox, it isn't just sort of being soft. It's something Chantal Mouffe, a political writer, calls agonistic dissent. In other words, you don't fall out, but you actually have a critical perspective. You say, oh, is that right? I think this. Are there any other views? That's not how I see it. And we've lost the ability somehow. We feel we've got to be nice as opposed to be true in a compassionate way. So I think there's something about, what do we mean when we say collaborate? What does it mean when we say working with diversity and paradox too? And I think there's something also when we talk about values. I think it's something that I've used this phrase, the path is made by walking. And it's something that a South African complexity scientist called Paul Cilliers said, that in a sense, everything is about ethics. That if the complexity view says we can't know everything, then what we choose to see or what we choose to value and not value, everything is in a sense an ethical choice. So we can't get away from ethics. But it's really deeply exploring for both individuals and for organizations. What does matter? Do we just think people are selfish? One view that I think is very pernicious that comes out in laissez-faire economics quite often is the idea that people are basically selfish. So if you tell people long enough, all you've got to do is to be a good consumer, to be a good citizen. Everybody's selfish, so that's okay. We'll all be individuals and it'll all come out in the wash and balance up. But that's a very pernicious view, whereas the sociobiology view would be that people have both compassion, requirements to collaborate, and sometimes they value their individual needs. You need to get people to think through. And then organizations, I think, to also set up, it's back to what we value in organizations. You need to set up a culture that values people coming up with new ideas or saying, have you noticed this is changing? How do you encourage people to move into feeling more empowered, being able to challenge at whatever level, being able to notice newness, which is something that many organizations don't do. So it's a softer, it isn't like you've got to work out for yourself what is your ethical stance and understand how that fits and help an organization co-create its own ethical stance. And if the truth is anything goes providing we win, then it may not be for you. It may be something to challenge, or it may not. But these are ethical issues, aren't they?
Could I maybe take things in a little direction towards the word trust? And I want to frame it around the following. I'm a metrics guy, so you're going to have to listen to some metrics. But we had an academic study about 5 years ago where a business professor looked at whistleblower reports from the then largest whistleblowing company in the world. They allowed him to review anonymized whistleblower reports. And a couple of what he was able to ascertain really stunned the compliance world. One of which was that companies that had a robust culture of speak up, and I'm going to go to that, define that in a moment, had a significant, or in the American parlance, material decrease in overall fines and penalties. And in the accounting world, that means 5%. And if you're $1 billion corporation, that's obviously a lot of money. But what he found was it's not speaking up. It's not someone reporting on the hotline. It's not someone even going into their supervisor's office. It's listening to that person. And even more, it is, if not embracing the process, certainly allowing the process to occur. And then the employee trusting that they won't be retaliated against, and that whatever their report or concern is will at least be evaluated fairly. And his second sort of aha moment from that was that if you have that culture of speak up, listen up, and a framework going forward, that employees will start to make suggestions. They will start to come forward and give ideas that can make the company run more efficiently, become more profitable, et cetera. And when you said that word trust, I wanted to see if that would, your definition or how you were using that concept really follows from what this study showed, that it's not having a hotline. It's not having an accessible hotline. It's not even listening to the people who have a hotline. It's a true culture. And I'm going to insert the word trust instead of speak up. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, no, I think that's brilliant. I completely. And I think that, two thoughts really. I don't think we spend, one of the things I'm really starting to think about a lot is how we engender culture is really important. It's a subtle thing, but it's hard to build trust. It's very easy to destroy it. You've only got to have one story once of somebody got pilloried because they were a whistleblower, and that's your lot. Nobody's going to do it again. So leaders understanding that one of their big jobs is about creating the culture that they want in a way that's very believable is one of the biggest jobs that they do. And then you will. And there are all sorts of tiny ways of doing that in the way that you do with kids. It's not really any different. There's a consistency, isn't there? There's doing what you said you thought you'd do. And yeah, it's very important. But I think it changes. I know what I was going to say, just briefly. At the end of a meeting, just saying, is there anything new been going on? Anything interesting? Any new shoes? Anything you want to mention? That's all you've got to do to start nudging the culture into people thinking, oh, somebody will listen. I've had a good idea. I've noticed something interesting in the market. That's, I think trust is very important, completely. And easy, hard to build, easy to destroy.
Earnie, back over to you.
This has been a very enlightening conversation for us, Gene. And building on actually what Tom said about Speak Up, I'd maybe for us to end with a couple of quotes from your book that particularly resonated with me. And I'd like to say that in doing my work, I've actually shared these quotes, particular quotes, with people, and they've asked for copies of the quotes. And so this not only resonates with me, I think it will resonate with employees in general, but also with ethics and compliance professionals. And you say in your book, if we let things pass, things of which we don't approve, it becomes increasingly hard and even dangerous to oppose them at a later stage. Once an outcome begins to emerge, it becomes progressively more locked in, which to me talks about the importance of finding your voice and raising your voice skillfully in ways that align with your intention and the outcomes that you hope for. And then in terms of how to live in times of uncertainty and disruption, I love this quote: find our moral compass, face what is happening, show up and play our part, nurture our humanity, value life, value others, value the future, and stay true. Any thoughts from you on those two quotes?
No, I think that's a lovely way to end. Thank you for bringing in those quotes. Yes, thank you.
Earnie, with that, I'm going to ask Dr. Boulton if our listeners wanted any more information on your book or Embracing Complexity as you help businesses navigate this, or if they wanted to connect with you, what might be the best place or places for them to go?
I have a website called embracingcomplexity.com. And on that, you'll find information about both books. You'll find talks I've given, articles I've written, and you can message me through that and be in contact with me. And I love hearing from people. I really appreciate these kind of conversations. It's how I learn and develop, through these kind of conversations. So I appreciate the opportunity. Well done. And that's a lovely cover of the book, which is a whole other story of how we came up with such a lovely cover. But thank you so much for having me.
It's been a pleasure. And all I can say to any of our listeners, if you have the opportunity to visit with Dr. Boulton, don't walk, run to it. Thanks so much. We look forward to continuing this conversation.
Thank you.
Compliance Podcast Network. Start your mornings with daily compliance news, quick, sharp updates on the top compliance and ethics stories in under 5 minutes every morning in Compliance Podcast Network. Because compliance never sleeps. Need practical advice fast? Check out Compliance Tip of the Day. One actionable idea to level up your program. Short and sweet, every day on Compliance Podcast Network. Got 10 minutes? We've got the week's top 10 stories. 10 for 10 brings you the big compliance headlines. Fast, fun, and focused. Every Saturday on Compliance Podcast Network. And don't miss the Sunday Book Review, where compliance meets culture through must-read books and big ideas every Sunday in Compliance Podcast Network. Whether you're in the office, on a walk, or commuting, stay smart, stay ethical, stay tuned. Only on the Compliance Podcast Network. Available wherever you listen to podcasts.